G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic day and so far a brilliant start to your week. Now legends, as always, we do have a lot to go over, all the way from the very front line, all the way through to politics. We'll look at the maps, I'll compare maps, show you the geolocations. This gives us the best possible idea of where things are moving. Then we'll zoom out, we'll go on the political space and we'll look at Putin's supposed isolation. What we've seen though in the last months is red carpets rolled out in America for Putin and his reception in Beijing. And we'll look at the tension that this is creating around the world and where we are seeing dividing lines being drawn. But where we'll start with strategic strikes. We'll look at what Zelensky is saying about a ceasefire, some considerations in this because everything has a pro and a con, and then we'll look at improvements to some systems also that should be very worrying with fibre optic FPVs beyond 20 kilometres behind the line. So let's start with these long-range strikes and what Zelensky has said and his growing frustration. So overnight, we have seen large Russian strikes against Ukraine and Ukrainian strikes against Russia. We have this graphic here. This is showing just the amount of systems that went from Russia into Ukraine, both drones and missiles, most of this going out into the west, being described as hell in Lviv. We see areas like this. This is the Sparrow Industrial Park on fire. Now, with areas like this, industrial, manufacturing, technological areas, in time of war, I don't care what Wikipedia says is happening here. We know that there's so much of this is going towards the war effort and no players are using multiple systems against nothing. We have seen Ukraine is continuing its attacks, not only against refineries, but then against power plants as well. This is in the Bryansk region. Ukrainian missiles reportedly have hit the thermal power plant here, and there has been some blackouts occurring in multiple areas. This is not all of the strikes, just some of them. And Zelensky has spoken about these long-range attacks of 50 missiles, 500 attack drones, and he's saying a unilateral ceasefire in the skies is possible, and is precisely that which could open the way to real diplomacy. Now, given how the diplomacy has fallen apart in the last couple of months, where really it looked like there was a glimmer of hope, I don't think we're going to see any real diplomacy for several months now. But let's look at this, a unilateral ceasefire. And Zelensky seems open to, at least by this tweet, to reinstate that air truce, which we did see for some time. Now, a few months ago, when Ukraine really began its attacks against these Russian oil refineries, I did say that Russia's strategy to keep these drones away from those refineries might lie in a little bit of almost like reverse psychology or reverse strikes. The actual ability to intercept these drones going to those refineries is almost impossible. Russia's just so big, there's so many refineries, these drones can be so numerous, no one in the world is going to have enough air defense to hit these. The best way may be to continue and maybe increase strikes and potentially look for some sort of air truce to be reinstated. That said, there's consideration, there's pros and cons to all of that. But the considerations back then that remain correct, and this is why I've said that Ukraine may, how bad is it if Zelensky's open to this? Because I said Ukraine is saying, and they're still saying, that their new victory plan, it's gone from Leopards, it's gone from Russia stealing washing machines to this and that, to now it's almost solely reliant on that by striking these facilities, oil will drop, money in Russia will drop, the people will rise up then against Putin and the government and have an overthrow. Even if history doesn't actually show that that's how that happens, it actually cements support. But that is being sold from Kaya Kalas to Kyiv. That is being sold as this is the new path to victory. So if there's then a unilateral ceasefire in the sky, well, there's going to have to be something else. There's going to have to be tactical or tactical victories leading to operational, leading to strategic victories. The other consideration is the Russian drones. Let's say the Garan, the one being used the most long range. This has shown, it is showing actually increasing tactical ability, not only hitting areas 1,000 k's away, hitting areas 12 kilometers away and being used in that shorter medium range. And the Ukrainian long-range drones, these has not shown that ability. I'm not saying that they can't, but I haven't seen that ability. So if there is a unilateral ceasefire against energy or oil facilities or long-range strikes, say like we had seen, the amount of Garans that Russia may use may not really change that much. It will just change different targeting of those. We haven't seen those Ukrainian drones be able to do the same thing. But Russia need to weigh up some stuff in this too. It needs to weigh up, okay, if we would agree to some ceasefire in the air, well, our refineries are going to be safe, okay, bottom line of money, but then we are unable to strike Ukrainian targets long range, whether it be manufacturing or logistics or energy. And also both states need to take into account the restock time too, that once there's a ceasefire in place, look, we can probably safely assume that ceasefire is going to fall apart at some point. Both countries are going to be restocking missiles and drones, and how will that go forward? So again, what will we see? I'm unsure, but we will continue tracking with this. But I just don't think for Russia and Ukraine at the moment, I think for both of their considerations, I think Ukraine is going to look, there's going to be targeting our energy facilities, but we need to strike these oil facilities. That's being sold as our best way moving forward. And Russia may have almost that in reverse. But Ukraine and President Zelensky are growing more and more frustrated by this, and I'm surprised it's taking this long. We talk about European rhetoric versus reality, that Germany or France's rhetoric of whatever it takes, however long it takes, but we're not seeing those top-end systems entering the battlefield. There's frustration growing. Now, Zelensky says there's zero real reaction from the world, and the reaction is tweets. But beyond that, there's not really that much. And he's saying various parts to these Russian missiles, these are still being supplied to Russia from Western countries. And then he's pointing direct fingers at states, at the US, at China, at the UK, at Switzerland, at South Korea, and at the Netherlands, that these continue to be manufactured and being sent into here. Now, again, we have said the actual ability to clamp down on this is going to likely be like impossible. China's going to just be impossible, but dual-use items through importing and exporting and how they can be used in different systems, very, very difficult. But I do believe we'll continue to see that frustration grow. I'm actually surprised it's taking this long. But the new wonder weapon that is coming into the fold is not just strikes against these targets. It's now for Russia to be getting hit by US Tomahawk missiles and the supply of Tomahawks to Ukraine. Now, let's go through some of the considerations and some of the issues on this that are just largely being ignored. Now, JD Vance, they've had a consideration for these, but Putin has said this will lead to the destruction of our relations, or at least the positive trends that emerged in these relations. We'll talk more about politics later on in the video. Wall Street Journal reported last week that the US will provide Ukraine with intelligence on long-range energy infrastructure targets in Russia. But one US official and three other sources told Reuters the Trump administration's desire to send long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine may not be viable because of current inventories are committed to the US Navy and other uses. There are serious questions being asked around the US stockpiles and actually the ability to keep solid supply of these too as tensions skyrocket all around the world, especially when we look at the manufacturing of weapon systems that China, America's biggest competitor, is absolutely blowing everyone else out of the water. So there's that consideration too. In the US, they will look after their own stockpiles first. Cruise missiles up to about 2,500 kilometers, which means if Ukraine got missiles, the Kremlin and all of European Russia would be within targeting range. Putin on Thursday said it was impossible for Tomahawks without the direct participation of the US military personnel, so any supply of missiles to Ukraine would trigger a quantitatively new stage of escalation. Also, this will mean a completely new, quantitatively new stage of escalation, including relations between Russia and the US. Now, there's a few sticking points in this. People love to tweet and do this and do that, all the ones who have never served and won't actually serve. People like to act as if a Tomahawk is going to be approved tomorrow and approved today and fired tomorrow. This just isn't the case unless it has much, much more US participation. And the US, they're willing to participate economically by, as far as the Europeans send money into America and will participate in this as long as you're paying us. But we're seeing less and less willingness to participate as far as having contractors or more involvement at least. But against these Tomahawk missiles, and I've said this for some time, I think Ukraine's best path forward is high volumes of drones. Russian air defense may actually have an easier time against these systems in low quantities. This is literally what this air defense was made for specifically. This is why drones are such a spanner in the works. There's just so many of them. They're not following the same trajectories. So it may actually have an easier time against these unless it is in massive numbers. And there is a lot of questions just about those actual quantities of these systems that could be delivered, seeing that the US, they're not looking at Russia at the moment. They're looking into the then Pacific region as a whole. But we have seen some updates, and I have spoken about the Garand's being used in different ways. And we see this footage here. Now, this footage has come out. There's multiple different angles of this too, but we see a Russian drone looking upon a Ukrainian train here. We'll try and pause it because you get the clouds moving in the way. And then what we can see is the locomotive, two cargo-looking then trailers, as well as then a passenger area too. And then we can see a Garand impact into this, causing significant damage. Now, from the reporting, there hasn't been anyone killed in this. We are seeing Ukraine and Russia go after more trains. Now, this train did have a drone cage on it, and as far as what's in the cargo as well, we are unsure of. But something we have spoken about is these Garands. They are going from more of your dumb drone fly and go along a set trajectory to now we're seeing ones with cameras, and as well as there's been some rumors, and we've spoken about the Iskander here. We did speak about the Iskanders of could this have some level of laser targeting, as we have another drone watching this in the air. We know laser targeting is much less susceptible to jamming as GLONASS or GPS is. Could we have one laser designating and striking? There's potential for that. I had an engineer on here to talk about could this be possible on some of the chips that we had seen from the downed Iskanders, and it basically came to the conclusion of yes, possibly. So we see that there. Now, we know drones are going after and intelligence are going after a lot of trains. We see that one being struck. And of course, we have seen those passenger trains have then bridges go down in Russia as well. But this is some footage that should be of concern as well. Now, this is Kramatorsk right here. And what we're looking at is this was on board a Russian fiber optic FPV drone. This is beyond 20 kilometers behind the closest possible point on the line. And if you assume that these drone operators are, say, 5 kilometers back, we're at 25 kilometers plus of a fiber optic drone with perfect image flying around Kramatorsk. Many people are surprised of how Kramatorsk actually looks. And yeah, this is how it is looking 20 Ks back off the line. It's like two different worlds. And then we see this drone coming in and striking a Ukrainian military SUV in here. At least this is the claim of it, but you can see the camouflage on it there and striking. And this is operating a large way behind the line. So we have a look, we zoom in, we have Kramatorsk, we have the Chasiv Yar region is really the closest area, and we'll go Kramatorsk here, Frontline, closest point, made 19.5 kilometers, but realistically your operator there is going to be behind the line. And that is impressive distance for something which does have that FPV fiber optic umbilical physical connection. And this is making logistics everywhere more and more of a nightmare. If you start seeing that extend, which drone development is going forwards, not backwards, going to create more and more issues. So let's have a look on the maps. Here, of course, is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupies S22, the purple since 2014, the red check ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. The red check on this map, this is on the Huliapol, Velika Novosilka front line, the area that has been in free fall for a number of weeks, from Poltavka to Ternova. This area moving more and more. But you do see some blue on here around Sosnivska. We will talk about that as we have further confirmation Ukraine has made some ground back here. But as far as the net ground, it is going in Russia's favor. So let's have a look at some different maps in here from Mr. Suryak. Firstly, we'll start up in the north, Zelensky, Ivanivkia front line, and he shows this as vastly different. This whole area has broken in up through then north of Zelensky and into Ivanivkia, but following where the river runs through this sector in here. Again, the grey zone in here, there's a healthy dose of this, and a lot of the other maps are showing that this grey zone is more likely red, but there's a lot of porosity on the front line up here. And then we'll come down onto, if you will, the Huliapol front line, where this is doing a bit of a western flank maneuver. So let's have a look. And again, this can be in behind many of the fortifications we see up in the north here around that Sosnivska area where the deep state shows the blue coming back. We have confirmation of that from Suryak today. Ukrainian forces entered the locality of Yanovarske, as well as recapturing areas in Sosnivska and establishing themselves there. So this area, Russia made some ground just under Inner Antonove, which is being shown, and as well Sosnivska area, Yanovarske in here, coming back under control from then combat by the Ukrainian forces. Then we have more on the Huliapol front line. During the last 3 days, Russia made new advances towards Poltavka, Okochne, and Novomyalivka, where we do see down in this sector, direction of Poltavka and Novomyalivka area, that this is continually moving. And we have spoken about the real problems that this is creating. And if we look at where Velika Novosilka is, and let's go from Velika to the most western extreme in here and line this up in a straight line, so just down from here, you have about 30 kilometers. If this was to move, then another 30 kilometers. You can see how then catastrophic this would be for the remainder of the south being squeezed against the Dnieper River, Zaporizhia, and Orokhiv too. So keep an eye on this. And this is moving day after day, but also increasing in speeds in some areas. We have another map update. We're going to come into the Konstantinivka front line, Kurdyamivka, Toretsk area, this pocket that has formed in here. And we will see that the last 10 days, Ukraine army managed to recapture the trench system, Alexandro Shortny. So there has been some movement back in, still again shown under all grey zone in here, but just in around this sector where my cursor is, that Ukraine has pushed that back. But there's still, again, a very healthy serve of grey zone between Chasiv Yar and Alexandro Shortny on this map. So let's then have a look at other areas. Let's look at Pokrovsk. We have, of course, Pokrovsk actual is where we'll start. We see the grey zone moving up into Pershno-Stravnave. Again, at this point in time, I think most of Pokrovsk should be actually under grey zone. If we have a look at this map today, you can see some minor Ukrainian advancements in here or taking back areas, but Russia breaking into the western side and southern side of Pokrovsk as well. So if we zoom in here, you can see movement up to where this road is sitting as well, up to where the train line is coming in, where there's been some minor pushing back, but breaking in along the bottom area too. So this should be of concern. Again, to get an idea of actually how this looks, many maps are saying many different things, but again, it is absolutely an area where there's a lot of focal points, but it's taking all the focus and ignoring areas like Kupiansk. So let's have a further look here. Russian army took full control over the locality of Chunishne, and this just sits down in here, moving up that train line by the looks of it. To the north of here, we have the Kushtov Yar, Novoshakovka front line. Again, this is an absolute mess. I'll say anyone online who says they exactly know what is going on in here probably doesn't. We see Russia likely continuing to exploit on the eastern side in the direction of Sofivka. That tends to be across many of the mappers are saying this, but then Ukrainian military pushing as well on the western side around Nikhorovka, Dorozhne area too. So we have, this is where Dorozhne is as well though on this, that Russia is pushing to the north out through Vilna, Kushtov Yar area as well. So again, the maps are just a mess in here. They're saying re-entered part of Vilna. So the Russians are pushing out to the northwest, Ukraine is pushing on the east, Russia is continuing to push north on the east here, heading towards Druskivka. So we'll get a better idea on this at some point, but we do know there is like a blackout around reporting on this front line, but there are multiple envelopments getting made by both Russia and Ukraine seemingly at the same time. Move our way up into this Seversk front. We do have a geolocation to show you up in here, and as well, a couple of maps. So, of course, we have Zvanivkia. We have this area. I can't read it under there. I will on the map in a second. And Fyodorivka. So, firstly, let's show you the geolocation. Now, we didn't see this area move for a long time. Now we are starting to see it move every few days. So around Fyodorivka, we did see 3 or 4 Russian flags go up. I believe 4, but I've just marked 3. This is one of them geolocated in here. This is outside the grey zone in this sector, which of course is to the south of Siversk. But then just to the east of here, we do have Suryk saying there are multiple updates. So if we see on his update here, on this front line during the last 4 days, the Russian army continued advancing northwest of Ivano-Dorivka, taking control of the first trenches adjacent to the Zelensky pond. Combing operations taking place in Vermimka and Fedorivka since that time. So further movements then up in the direction of Zelensky as well as in Vermimka. And if we get an idea of just where this reservoir is sitting, you can see the location of said reservoir right up here. So he's saying there's operations right out into these sectors and that this front line is squeezing onto Siversk as the north of Siversk starts to squeeze down as well. Further operations, he's showing on that western side exactly where those geolocations were, and on the eastern side where this was then exploited out to the west and north, and then that southern area is being filled in. Of course, this is around Vremimka, saying that that is coming under control. And then we have the northern side, the Terny side, the Liman side, and of course the other envelopment around Borova that is taking place also. We do see some updates around this, that around Dobrasheve, this is where that Russia is continuing to expand their control. And this is Dobrasheve area, Novoselivskia, Shandrolahove. This is further expanding and moving, and we can see the depth on grey zone on the deep state map. Again, the maps can be very unclear, and a lot of maps are driven by biases as well as legalities of reporting too. So we'll rely on more geolocations, but I do believe these are going to get more clear as we step into the colder months. Now let's have a look up in the north. Of course, Kupiansk. Now, this was all the talk for some time, and it seems to go like loud, then silent, but this area is critical. Let's have a look at Suryk map. Now, he's saying on the northern front, northeastern front over the past days, the situation of the Ukrainian army in the northwestern sector of Kupiansk has deteriorated. Russian army has managed to consolidate its positions between these areas and the central square. However, recon groups have advanced further, reaching the Kupianka River south of Svanitska Street and in the direction pressing from other axes. So moving down, exploiting further inside Kupiansk where we see this grey zone heading. And a lot of the grey he is showing as red. Now, is it under firm control or grey? It's probably hard to tell. There's a lot of DRGs operating, but we can see not only Kupiansk, the break-in in here, but the threat for the entire pocket that has been formed from Senkove to Kupiansk with a waterway running in between it, and how this can be incredibly costly. But again, what you're looking for in attritional war is to increase the cost. You're not looking to increase your kilometre squares. Let's then have a look in Vovchansk. Now, there's a lot of reporting of increased Russian actions in and around Vovchansk, and Suryk, he's showing that there's been some minor advancement in this sector. AMK, his map actually agrees with a minor advancement in this area as well. So let's step into the political sector, and we talk about these things a fair bit. We talk about Russia moving towards China, not only moving towards China because they have to, offload their resources somewhere, but also being pushed in that direction too. And the problems that this raises for Europe and America down the line, of course, with China becoming more and more powerful. Now, we heard for years that Putin was completely isolated. We've even heard for years that Xi was isolated, and that just is untrue. And what we have seen in the last months couldn't be further from the truth. So Carnegie Endowment, where they talk about this, and well, we know there's a lot of Western funding into this think tank, but it's still worth going through, just keep that in mind. Putin's diplomatic role leaves Trump in an awkward position. We saw the G20 summit in Australia in 2014. It wasn't only Western leaders who followed then US President Barack Obama's example and gave Putin the cold shoulder. Even Xi Jinping spent more time with Obama than Putin. But compared to that summit, Putin's position today looks like an unmitigated diplomatic triumph. US leader has set the tone. We're rolling out the red carpet in Alaska last month. Donald Trump, he was absent from then the celebration and the parade marking the end of the Second World War in Asia. And his absence only reinforced the Kremlin's narrative that it is not Russia that is isolated, but the West, the center of the world, has shifted to the south and the east, along with global economic growth and the global majority. The situation was further aggravated by Trump's undiplomatic comments on social media, which he called on Xi to please give my warmest regards to Putin, to Kim Jong-un, as you conspire against the United States of America. They say the US president sounded distinctly like an offended teen who had not been invited to the birthday party of their popular boy or girl in the class. Only highlighted the ambiguity of Trump's position. Did he refuse to go, or was he not invited? And this is a pretty bad look in here, saying that these countries, you're conspiring directly against us, as we see where they're just trying to move in the more powerful direction of the state. But you can see this diplomatic isolation lockout. What then the European leaders or the Western leaders may be saying versus what we are actually seeing in the SCO or seeing in Beijing is completely different. Sorry, this is in the wrong order. Let's go to this one right here. Now, Putin's photo sessions from China look like a natural continuation of his photos from Alaska, turning those early images against Trump. The Alaska summit no longer looks like a manifestation of Washington's goodwill, but more like a confirmation that nothing can be decided without the Russian leader, while Putin and his friends are doing just fine without Trump. A personal meeting is one of the most important resources US presidents actually possess. It is increasingly obvious that the resource was squandered in Alaska, and a meeting with the president, one-on-one. This is a huge deal. We saw when the US opened this up with China back in the late 20th century, how important that was. Of course, this being opened with Putin, photo op, then this, and now nothing has come of that. We know how this looks. Now, there's been no visible result from the Alaska meeting. Trump spent a valuable diplomatic asset without influencing Putin in any way. On the contrary, it was Trump who changed his position in line with the Kremlin during the meeting. Before the summit Anchorage, Trump was insisting on a ceasefire in Ukraine. Afterwards, it had apparently ceased to matter. And further on, I know everyone loves to, say, oh, Trump is supporting this war, but he's saying that the war can continue, we'll sell the weapons, but we're not paying for them. And, you can continue to fight to the conclusion. The US is more out than it has actually ever been. But economically, they're a alt-capitalist state. They're willing to sell for what they need to. Putin's successful trip to China made it clear that the main justification for Trump's reapproachment with Putin is a myth. The US president has failed to divide China and Russia. Not only failed to divide, these are getting pushed closer and closer together, as we'll go over in another article in a second. In the process of giving away a diplomatic asset to Putin, Trump also sacrificed an important achievement of US diplomacy in recent years, the reapproachment with India. For many years prior to that achievement, between the world's two biggest democracies, India was closer to Moscow than to Washington, which in turn supported Pakistan, which was constantly sliding into dictatorship. But following his talks with Putin, Trump declined to make good on a threat to introduce more sanctions against Russia, but he did slap an additional 25% tariff on Indian exports to the US over New Delhi's purchases of Russian oil, bringing tariffs then up to 50%. So we see the US-India relationship moving away. The relationship between Russia and India seems actually stronger than ever, with a lot more military deals going through, as well as the oil hasn't stopped. And Indian Prime Minister Modi, who had not visited China once in the previous 7 years, was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Tianjin, rubbing shoulders with Xi and Putin. And these dividing lines, they're getting pushed into areas as well, that these sanctions against something like India, this can backfire. In India, they're not playing ball. But now if the US pulls these away to try and bring back in, how does that then look? Any hope Trump may have had of forming an alliance against China can be written off. Even the sight of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with Ukraine's allies at the European Summit in Paris on September 4th couldn't eclipse the visuals from Putin's trip to China. The celebrations in China were attended by defectors, he says, from the Western camp. Now, this is pretty strong language to use the term defectors, especially in these articles, these think tanks that are written and supported financially directly by these countries. But you will see. It's almost impossible now to imagine representatives of the Global South at European meetings in support of Ukraine. And this is true. Could you imagine at this point in time, these representatives of the Global South and representatives of large states in the Global South at these meetings in Europe? But we see the European leaders at these meetings in the South, even from among the minority shareholders. Indeed, why should they bother when even the US is distancing itself from support for the besieged countries? The US is moving away. Do you really think that you're going to bring China or the major players back into support? The opportunity to outweigh the current impression of Putin's diplomatic tour de force will only come in November when Johannesburg hosts the G20 summit. Putin may not attend due to, of course, the ICC. warrants. But even if the Russian leader is not at the summit, and especially if he is there after the Chinese celebrations, it will be Trump, not Putin, who has to try and win over the other attendees and prove that he is not the one facing international isolation, including by seeking phone opportunities and verbal support from Putin, Modi, and Xi. So what you see is there's like this Western camp and everyone else. And people use the term the West and the rest as saying, oh, look at this and everyone else. But now it seems like that the rest is growing ever more powerful, ever more close. And the West, we're sitting and trying to hold on to, well, Europe especially is just trying to hold on to any historical relevance. The US is trying to hold on to their position at number one, and everyone's just in this fertility crisis that is developing. And everyone else is tending to just move on and say, well, we don't need you in this. And the final kill shot that will be moving away from dollars, or if we do see the US economy coming under further pressure in the coming years, as I believe as Deutsche Bank has said that the US economy is only holding on due to AI development and overspending in this. Now, with Putin in charge, Russia's vassalage to China will only deepen. This is another article, and again, we will do the rest of this tomorrow. But Putin has said Biden did something that was unthinkable. He drove China and Russia together. It's the one thing you didn't want to do because they're basically natural enemies. Now, Trump in this is awfully hypocritical. I'm not saying that Biden didn't do this. Trump has done this even more. And then we can add in a third party in this of India. You've driven the two most populous countries from being absolute enemies to now Modi meeting with Xi, the two most populous countries with massively growing economies, and in the country with all these resources, all this food, everything, then into this sector as well. Trump has had, I believe, more influence on that than Biden has from his tariffs and sanctions through to actions and tweets. America's chance of reversing this trend remain elusive, and recent tariffs against India may only push Putin closer to Xi's embrace. In Trump's telling, a partnership between China and Russia is unnatural, which may enable the US to drive a wedge between the two. A key source of distrust is supposedly demography. Russia has tremendous amounts of land, China has tremendous amounts of people, and China needs Russian land. But this is also the threat of this too, is, well, they both somewhat need each other. Russia, as far as raw either manufacturing capability and an area to then offload their crude or their oil to, or refined products, China need as much as they can because they are just a behemoth of using absolutely everything. That, at the end of the day, you have no permanent friends or enemies. There may be a wedge drawn in here, but as long as they're both helping each other, why would they? And this is where states, regardless of where they're liberal or where they're authoritarian or whatever, they act like realists on the global stage to push their interests first and foremost. Historically, all of this has caused a lot of harm to the Kremlin, but China's population started to shrink. Those fears may mostly be alleviated. And we have seen that, at least reported, leaked FSB documents talking about we still need to be very careful about then more relationship with China and how China may be moving on some of these areas. But we have spoken about the gaps that Russia has, the gaps that China has against the US. They both perfectly fit to backfill these gaps. In my opinion, China's population shrink. I think that this, personally, I think that is massively overblown. That even if it shrinks by a large amount, massive amount, ours aren't doing any better. We are backfilling ours with migration where they are not, and we don't know how migration actually looks with many different ethnicities in one when the country goes to war. We don't really know actually how that does look, but China's still going to have, even at worst case, in the high hundreds of millions or low billions. And what I've said is China will cross ethical boundaries that we wouldn't in liberal states to fix population issues, and I don't see that it's going to have a complete collapse if there are very easy ways to actually fix that may be a step across red tape that we wouldn't do. And we even, of course, have that hot mic incident between Putin and Xi talking about artificial organs and living forever and all of this too. So again, it's not science fiction. Some of the medical shit the country is doing is unbelievable. China is world leading in this bone glue at the moment instead of a physical plate and screws if you break your arm. Anyway, legends, have a fantastic day and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.